What if I told you that some cities accidentally fixed their rent crisis, and the fix had nothing to do with the government swooping in to save the day? 8 American cities just watched their rents fall off a cliff, and the reason is almost embarrassingly simple once you see it. So we're going through all 8 city by city, and by the end you're going to understand exactly why your city is cheap or expensive. And it comes down to one decision your local government made years ago that nobody talked about. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Number 1. Austin, Texas. Austin used to be the city landlords bragged about at dinner parties. From 2020 to 2022, rents shot up faster than almost anywhere in the country, and people were getting priced out of neighborhoods they'd lived in for years. Then something flipped. By mid-2024, Austin's median asking rent dropped 9.6% year over year, the biggest decline of any major metro in the country, landing around $1,399. And no, it wasn't the tech layoffs that did it. Everyone wants that to be the answer, but it's not. What actually happened is that Austin spent years approving apartment buildings at a pace that made other cities look like they were napping. Cranes everywhere, developers flooding in. A D-US, basically small houses built in someone's backyard, got way easier to permit. Smaller lot sizes got approved. Projects that would have spent 5 years in permit hell somewhere else were getting green-lit fast. Redfin confirmed Austin as the top rent-declining metro in their 2024 analysis. When vacancy rates climb, landlords lose leverage. They started offering free months just to fill units. Number 2. San Antonio, Texas. San Antonio is a city of over 1 million people that somehow never became the punchline of a rent horror story, and nobody's talking about it. Think about what this city actually has going on. It's got a massive military presence, a huge tourism economy, and it sits right between Austin and the border, which by every normal rule should be a recipe for landlords printing money. But one-bedroom rents there have stayed well below the national average, flat or even dipping while comparable cities kept climbing. What San Antonio did differently was almost aggressively boring. No chasing tech campuses, no rebranding itself as Silicon Southwest, none of that. It just kept approving single-family homes and smaller multi-unit buildings at a steady pace, year after year, without the boom and bust drama. Its permitting process runs faster than most comparable metros, and the city never let neighborhood-level zoning fights turn into the years-long blockades you see in places like Los Angeles. That consistency builds up over time. San Antonio never accumulated the regulatory debt that makes housing expensive elsewhere. Number 3. Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix got hit like a piñata during the pandemic migration wave. People piled in from California, Seattle, New York, renting moving trucks and just showing up, and landlords responded by jacking rents 20, 25, even 30% in a single year in some neighborhoods. It was completely out of control. But Phoenix had something California never did: land and a state government actually willing to use it. Arizona passed legislation that stopped local governments from blocking higher density housing, which sounds boring until you realize that in most of the country, local governments use zoning like a bouncer at a club, deciding who gets to live where and keeping the list very, very short. So developers who'd been sitting on parcels for years waiting for the politics to shift started breaking ground almost immediately. Multifamily permits spiked in 2022 and 2023. New units flooded the market, vacancy rates climbed, and by 2024, rents across multiple Phoenix submarkets were flat or falling after years of brutal increases. Number 4. Denver, Colorado. Denver was a magnet for every remote worker, ski bum, and young professional who decided they were done with wherever they came from, and the housing stock just couldn't absorb all of them. Rents climbed for years with basically no relief in sight. Then the city did something that sounds almost too small to take seriously. It made it dramatically easier to build ADUs, which are small apartments over garages in backyards, attached to existing homes. Denver is packed with single-family houses sitting on lots with dead space behind them. Space that could have been housing for years, but wasn't because the permits were expensive, slow, and buried in design requirements that made small projects financially pointless. Colorado's 2024 land use legislation then pushed things further. requiring cities to allow duplexes, triplexes, and higher density buildings near transit corridors in neighborhoods where that stuff had been banned since the 1970s. DU applications jumped once the city cut fees and streamlined approvals. New inventory climbed, and rents started pulling back after years of going only one direction. Number 5. Washington, D.C. D.C. had a very specific post-pandemic nightmare on its hands. Glass towers downtown, the kind that used to be packed wall-to-wall with federal contractors and lobbyists, started sitting at 30, 40, even 50% vacancy. Empty buildings everywhere, and meanwhile renters were getting absolutely crushed by a market with way too few apartments. So the city did something other cities had been talking about for years without actually doing it. It started converting those empty office buildings into apartments, at scale, with real tax incentives and zoning changes that made the math work for developers who'd otherwise just let those buildings collect dust. And what comes out of an office conversion isn't some luxury high-rise with a rooftop pool. These tend to be smaller units, cheaper than brand new construction, in neighborhoods that are already walkable and close to transit. Pew Research flagged converted micro-units as running about half the median market rate in cities where this actually got done. And rents in several DC neighborhoods softened as that new inventory landed. Number 6. Houston, Texas. Houston has no zoning code, none. You can legally build a skyscraper right next to a single-family home, which sits next to a strip club, which sits next to a church, and as long as the building codes check out, nobody can stop you. Urban planners hear that and their eyes starts twitching. But Houston also has some of the lowest rents of any major American city, and it kept them low even when the rest of the country was completely losing its mind on prices. Pew Research compared Houston directly to Dallas, and the gap is hard to ignore. Houston built fast, Dallas added restrictions, and Houston ended up with lower rents and a lower homelessness rate. Dallas went the other direction on both. When demand spikes in a Houston neighborhood, developers don't wait for a rezoning hearing or a city council meeting where homeowners complain about parking for 2 hours. They just build. And yes, the flooding risk is real, the sprawl is genuinely intense, and the commutes will age you. Number 7. Raleigh, North Carolina. Raleigh didn't pass some sweeping housing reform bill. Nobody threw a parade. The city just quietly allowed townhouses in more areas, made it easier to build 2- and 3-unit buildings on single-family lots, and trimmed the approval time for smaller projects. That's genuinely it. But those small changes sent a signal to developers who'd been sitting on their hands waiting to see if Raleigh was actually serious about growth. Infill projects, meaning new buildings dropped onto small lots inside existing neighborhoods rather than way out on the suburban fringe, suddenly made financial sense because smaller builders could afford to do them, which meant more units came online faster than anyone expected. Pew Research specifically paired Raleigh with Austin as cities where these kinds of regulatory tweaks directly slowed rent growth and pulled homelessness numbers down. Newsweek's 2024 rent analysis listed Raleigh among metros where rents actually fell year over year, after years of Research Triangle job growth pushing prices in only one direction. Number 8. Aurora, Colorado. Aurora spent years being the city people drove through to get to Denver. Then Zumper dropped their mid-2025 data, and Aurora showed up with one-bedroom rents falling 11 to 12% year over year, one of the fastest drops in the entire country. Let that sink in. And it's not random. Aurora got the same Colorado state-level reforms that pushed Denver to allow more ADUs and denser housing. But Aurora had something Denver didn't. Cheaper land and neighborhood associations that couldn't throw a 2-hour tantrum at every city council meeting. So when the state said build more, Aurora actually did it. Every city on this list said yes to more buildings, more units, more types of housing, and in every case, rents dropped or stopped climbing. That's not a coincidence. The cities where rents are still going up are almost always the cities where a small group of homeowners successfully blocked everyone else from building anything nearby.